Hey guys, how nice that you could join me. My name is Buunshin, and I'm doing a drum tutorial for this month's release of IMANU's Patreon. And yeah, today I'm going to show you how I think about drums, and I'm going to show you the basics of how I approach making different varieties of them. This is mainly going to be focused first on synthesized drums, then on acoustic drums, then I give you a little showcase of how I go about combining the two wherever necessary. This is not always the case, but so I'm choosing this order because I think it's going to be quite logical, and I really want you to understand why I make certain choices rather than that I just tell you like, hey, chuck this compressor on this fucking kick or whatever. So yeah, it's as simple as that. We're just gonna go through and I'm just gonna try my best to explain you everything. So this is my DAW of choice, FL Studio. If you're not familiar with this, you're out of luck because I'm not gonna explain much about the DAW. I'm just gonna show you what I do. Yeah, so I'm opening an instance of Serum because I like to think about the very basics of drums as, and listen very carefully, as energy in time and frequency. So what do I mean by that? Well, if you look at older kick drum synthesizers, they are focused on making a sine wave go from a high pitch to a low pitch over a certain amount of time. And how that is achieved is besides the point, but that's basically what it comes down to. There is usually a click at the start, whether this is made by like a little, a blip of sound or a DC offset or a sine wave going down really quickly or like resonance of a filter. Doesn't really matter. And then it becomes a body. So if we look at a very basic kick drum, let me find one real quick. Yeah, let me just go to drum hits and then kicks and then. Yeah, this is like a very classic dance drum kit kick. As you can see, it looks very much like a sine wave. It's more or less like a saturated sine wave, and it starts at a higher pitch and it goes down to a lower pitch. And this click at the very beginning, we could call that the transient, and we could call the rest the body. That's all you need to know for now when it comes to the kick. That's usually where I start with drums. So yeah, did I already open? Yeah, Aperture, there we go. So let's make one of those kicks and let's try to define all what we need with one sine wave, and then we can go from there. So I'm gonna choose a pitch which my kick will be based around. For now, I'm just gonna choose F or maybe C, a bit higher, maybe easier. Just gonna put it at a drum bass tempo because why not? And as you can see, it's just playing a sine wave at a single pitch. I'm gonna go through and use these envelopes to create a shape for the kick that, resembles this a little bit more. So with this, you can, select the duration of the kick really easily. I like this shape. Doesn't need to be long because I think the kick usually should just be there for a bit of punch. It doesn't have to have a huge body with a lot of bass because, that's where the bass is for. So now we have something that, could be a really simple kick. All that it needs is a little click at the start. And you can do that in several ways. You can, adjust the phase so that it starts at the halfway point of the waveform so that, you get this little click. I don't really like that sound. I used to do that a lot, but right now I'm just gonna add a little envelope to the pitch set it in unipolar mode, so it just goes upwards and then lands at this bass frequency. And the more I exaggerate this, the more it's going to click. So I don't really want to over exaggerate this. And the nice thing is you're able to read the amount of milliseconds right here, which makes you, a little bit more knowledgeable on what the durations of these envelopes should be. What I like doing is adding 2 envelopes so that you have an envelope for the very initial click at the start of the kick. But as you can see right here, this kick is also gradually changing in pitch. It's from this vibration right here up until this. This has a much larger period duration, which means it is a lower pitch. So not only it clicks at the start, it's also descending in pitch over time. So this envelope is for the transient, and then this will be for, descending over the duration of the whole kick. So I'm gonna add it again. There we go. Pay attention to your ranges. So how many semitones it's with how many semitones it's going to move, and how long it's going to take, and with what curvature, because as you can hear, it changes a lot. And then we have the very basics of what is a kick drum, right? Like, people could define this as a kick drum in a piece of music. It's like a very boring kick drum, but it has, that techie kind of character that me and IMANU and other divided artists and, lots of artists from other genres have used to acquire a specific vibe in a track. So getting back to what I was earlier talking about is, why do I specify this as energy in frequency and time? Well, if I look at the spectrum analyzer, you can see that the energy, that the representation of this graph is basically where energy is at what moment. Like, this frequency spectrum is moving quite quickly, but I still can't see everything, which is why I have this oscilloscope up here. But I basically try to monitor where is the energy at what point in time. Because if you understand that, this kick is hitting right here and it's descending in this much amount of time, blah, 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 you know where the sound energy is, and therefore you know how the kick works and what kind of role it can have in a track. Like, for instance, this kick is pretty short, but it's more than punchy enough in the mids, so it can fulfill a specific role in a track. And this is how I like to think about drums. Like, at its very core, they have the necessity to fit in a specific frequency area, hit in that specific frequency area in a specific way, and then that way they can support their role in the music the best. With just a synthesized kick, it's pretty boring, because you can just adjust your settings, where does it need to be at what time, and then it can be very loud and very effective. But what I think is that it usually lacks a little, how can I say it? It usually lacks a little character. It gets very boring. So this is why, even though you have these classic dance kicks or whatever, they almost never are like perfect sine waves. They always have something to them, like a little bit of distortion, or like a very specific modulation, or they have a bit of filtering on top. Or they have something along the lines of, specific distortion, or they have an embedded layer from an acoustic drum or something. And this is how I go about, or I should say, this is how I think about my drums, and this is all I used to do. So you know, for my older tracks that I released on Divider, for instance, and for my first Neo Signal EP, this is kind of what I would do. I would spend time to fit the drum in a specific area. I only showed you how to make a kick right now, but almost exactly the same goes for when I would make a snare. If I would want a snare, I would just choose a higher pitch, because a snare is just the same thing, but at a higher pitch. And then what differs is that usually it requires a bit of a different amplitude. Usually it doesn't require much of this, you know, body movement. Sometimes it can help a little bit, but usually I think it over exaggerates the character. Sometimes I think it doesn't really help. And usually the body is much shorter. At least that's how I like listening to them. Yeah, you end up with something like this. And what you're gonna need then is like a tail. So you can make this with noise. I like doing this with noise right now because I can show you how to make like a very simple representation of this. But yeah, let's choose something like some pink noise. Just gonna keep it mono for now because it doesn't really matter anyways. Just gonna turn this oscillator off. And I'm gonna leave some space for like the transient of the drum to hit, you know, so give it a slope of 20 milliseconds. I don't want to make the snare too long either, so should probably, you know, give it a shape like this. And now we have a little noise tail. It sounds really crap, but I'm gonna show you some tricks, wave shaper, so that they sound better. So first of all, what I like to do is I like to distort them together so they have some intermodulation, basically. Like the noise tail is going to distort on top of this body. So the tonality is going to be embedded in the snare. Okay, as you can see, you know, it has lows, it has very highs. I don't really like that. So I'm going to put a simple equalizer on the tail so it only, you know, splashes in the frequency area where I think it's necessary. That's much better already. Here, I mean, it sounds a little clunky still, but it starts to sound like a real snare drum. So you want to, you know, watch out what the relationship between this body and this tail is. Like this, I don't like having a body that is too over exaggerated, like the tonality of it, like that, that tone. Sometimes that can turn out really ugly. But yeah, the cool thing is messing around with these parameters and having to decide every little fucking detail of them makes it to where I think you learn to understand how drums work and what makes them sound good, which is going to be useful later on. Because we're going to move into something a bit more complicated than just synthesizing them. Yeah, so giving the snare some movement with an equalizer or the snare tail is already going to over exaggerate that, you know, that string movement that a snare drum would usually have on the back. If I make the Q factor too large, then you wouldn't be able to pinpoint where the movement exactly is. But if you make it too small, it's going to sound really ringy. And it sounds a bit like a meme. So I like to, you know, find a sweet spot. Don't overdo it too much. And there we go. We got like a very simple simple snare, right? It's like super simple. Gonna adjust the length. Yeah, and there we are. We don't even need to do much more with it. Like, if you would just want a functional snare that does something that doesn't distract you from the rest of the music, you could just have something like this. Well, it doesn't sound amazing, but I just made it in a couple seconds. If you spend more time nitpicking it in the context of a track, then I'm sure it'll sound much better, because that's what I used to do, and that is all I needed, basically. Just for good measure, I'm just gonna add some hi-hats. I'm gonna do that with a bit of noise as well. Just to show you what like a theoretical representation of a hi-hat could be. I'm also gonna use some noise for that. I'm just gonna make this one stereo because it'll be easier to make it sound good. So now, right now it's being triggered. And you can mess around with this curvature of this envelope. It's easy. It's not that hard, like, to make it sound good. So I would advise you, like, if you want to start out doing drums, I can imagine that it'll be, you know, easy to go for sample packs that already sound good and get a lot of samples with a lot of character from there. And these don't really have a lot of character, but they are really functional. Like, they're really loud, and because they're so simple, they might not distract you from the rest of the music, and they might, you know, make you zoom in on the music a little more. So having this skill in your arsenal, being able to make these, is really interesting and fun. And from this point on, you can make it more interesting than just this. You can, you know, add layers with resonators. You can add reverb to a snare. You can add chorus and whatever flangers, and then you can distort them together and try your best to emulate what would happen with real drums, like with different microphone techniques and stuff. So yeah, that is the basics of what I would do. But because I am a little bit more, you know, skilled at doing these things, I can basically whip them. I can just make these sounds here like this because I know, or like I feel comfortable thinking about them. It's no real magic for me what is happening anymore, because I understand where the frequencies are at which time, right? Because I understand this, I can, even if I make mistakes, I can adjust them because I know where stuff should be to make things sound good. At least with synthesized sounds like this. So what if we then apply that same knowledge to acoustic drums? Because why would we want to do that? Well, sometimes you want a track that revolves more around the drums, that the drums aren't just a functional thing, but that they actually supply character for in the music. That's how I like thinking about it. That the more acoustic it becomes, the more inherent quality it has. So naturally, I'm also going to show you how I would go about making acoustic drums. And I'm just going to do it shortly, just to explain the ideology behind it. So what I like using is addictive drums. I like using addictive drums because it has a very simplistic setup. I've also tried using Superior Drummer. It doesn't really resonate with me because it's so complex and there are so many details about what you can do, and sometimes adding too many options in there just doesn't work for me. So what I tend to do is I tend to keep it simple and try to work with what I have, and then try to make, try to do creative stuff on my own accord. Like if something isn't really included in here, I can try to do it outside of the box. Well, how do you really do that? Well, you have this trick that you can do where you can go to Addictive Drums and click separate out for all of the microphones. So in a drum setting, you would obviously have like a couple cymbals, some toms, a kick drum, snare drum, and whatever you can imagine. And these would all have individual microphones in a real setting if you would record like a drummer for real, live. So this is basically an emulation of that. But what I don't like is that, sure, I can put effects on this kick drum like this, and I can open an insert with like a bit of distortion and equalizer, blah, 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 blah. But these are not the tools that I'm used to, right? The tools that I'm used to are just the tools that I have in my DAW. So what I did is I made a preset for myself basically where I route everything out of FL Studio. It requires a bit of tinkering because you have to, specify your output connections, and then you have to open up some output audio. You have to open all of these send channels, and if you then need some more, you're gonna have to add more output channels. It's a bit finicky, but if you do it once, you can just make a preset out of that, and I have one right here, which is called Addictive Drums Compact Template. Just gonna load it up for a sec. And this is just a clean Addictive Drum setup with the kick right here, the snare mic, the hi-hat mic, the toms, the overhead, and the room. And all I need to do now is like specify what I really want, and I don't like loading in stuff that I'm not gonna use. So all the plugins are off, all the inserts are off. And then every time I make drums, I can just decide for myself what I want to do. But basically, when I'm doing this, I'm going to try to get the drums closer to what I'm doing right here. To try to make them fulfill their function. Like they're naturally gonna have a vibe, because that's just what acoustic drums do naturally. But I was thinking, if I want to get close to that, I should have some tools in my arsenal which can kind of bridge that gap. So basically, I'm just gonna make a simple drum loop. So you trigger this whole plugin with hitting specific notes, and because I've been doing this pretty often, I know where these notes are by heart. You'll find that out by using it yourself. Let's do something that has a lot of kicks. It's not really on the grid because I'm blind, apparently. Yeah, there we go. That's why it doesn't make sense. So this sounds super crappy, obviously. But what I can do is I can quickly scroll through these kits. I like this a little more. At first, what I try to do is I try to make them sound as good as I can just from the way they are played, just like what a drummer would do. Like, you can try to put as many effects on a thing as you can, but then it's going to take a really long time before it sounds good. And then in the end, you won't have a lot of control when you try to, perform with this thing, right? you should try to make stuff sound good from the source, which is the whole reason why you would synthesize stuff, because you can control the source. So why not do the same with acoustic drums, right? Just spend some time right here and yeah, so something like this might sound a little bit better. And yeah, so pay attention to the drum computers have alternate responses. So that's a kind of built-in mechanic, especially in here, that just like random phase, basically in a synthesizer, it's kind of this equivalent that every time you hit the drum, it's gonna trigger the same recording if you enable no alternative samples. But if you don't have it enabled, you're gonna have like drum recordings which are slightly different every time. And sometimes that can be nice, but I would say try to get that under control with, you know, manually doing velocity related stuff, because otherwise you'll be in the middle of working on something and you're like, why can't I gain the control that I need? It's because it's triggering some different samples by default. And then you can always, if you want the acoustic vibe, you can try to, you know, adjust different velocities on the go and alternate between 1 or 2 or 3, but not too many, because that'll make it too rigid for, you know, electronic music, I think. Or like, I don't know what the correct term is, but it just makes it too random, I guess. Yeah, and I would rather have control this way. Sometimes I hear a click right there and I don't really like that. So yeah, I'm not gonna go overboard trying to spend time with this this thing. I'm just gonna show you a couple things that you can do, like a couple effects that will make it sound better. I'm just gonna start with a simple Pro L, just like a mastering chain for this whole break. What is like instantly very apparent is that it sounds incredibly roomy. I'm never really afraid of trying to clip these drums, because sometimes that can make them much louder, and you can get yourself in a situation where clipping doesn't necessarily sound bad. So don't be afraid to push these drums a little bit. Sometimes that can add to the vibe as well. So I'm gonna, you know, first I just muted the overheads in the room microphone just to see what the direct microphones would sound like. I gotta say that I'm not a huge fan of these kicks, because they're so short. That's decent, I guess. So turning up the level is not always the answer. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna try to control where the frequencies hit, just like what you would normally do with a pitch envelope. So I'm going to say what the lowest frequency should be. It's nice to do that with a high pass filter, because it's going to resonate at the cutoff frequency when you create one of these really steep high pass filters. So especially, wait, maybe it's even better to do that with Pro Q. Yeah, because you can tune the high pass filter, which is what I really like about it. You can basically say, okay, I want this low cut or high pass, whatever you want, steep, and then you can say where you want it to be tuned by dragging around this thing. So for tuning drums, that's really cool. I would say just make sense, try to make sense out of it with your ears at first. I try to have my kicks lower higher if I can, because if you make them too low by default, then they're always gonna fight with the drums. So let's say, you know, I make a lot of my music in E flat minor, then I would want to have, you know, a B flat as a kick maybe, because it's a perfect fifth with the bass note of or the tonic of the scale. Yeah. So I found that using that frequency or something like C always works because it's just safe. I think a lot of the older funk breaks are just tuned to C by default, or something close to that. Just by, I don't know if it was on purpose or if the drummer did it by ear or something, or that they actually specifically tune it to a C. But yeah, it's interesting to think about stuff like that. And yeah, what I usually try to do is I try to gate things. So I don't try to use these envelopes too much, because then you kind of lose the natural decay that a drum has, and sometimes it starts to really show if, you know, you take away all the unnecessary decay out of a drum kit. So I like doing it with transient shapers. I like starting with this kilohertz transient shaper, and I like doing it until I just think that it sounds decent. It's, you know, it's distorting a bit in this limiter, so I'm trying to adjust the equalizer so that it won't sound bad when it goes into distortion. This resonance is like very tricky. Sometimes if you leave stuff like that in, it becomes really apparent in the context of a drum. But if you're always going to take out resonances, you're never going to have that one thing that's going to peek through the mix. So let's just leave it in for now, and if it becomes problematic later, then I'll just adjust it. But yeah, that kick sounds much tighter than what it was before. I mean, this is not gonna do so much because the kick isn't really resonant. So I might try to overdo that, see what's gonna happen. So, you know, it becomes much more like a dance kick. Yeah, I mean, this is not necessary at all. Let's keep it right there. I think this is fine. Also, like, looking at the length of it on the oscilloscope really helps. Yeah, and then I just go through these one by one. So let's say for the snare, I would want something a bit... Sorry, guys. Would want something a bit more specific, like a multiband transient shaper. If you look at a snare, like... Gonna turn that snare noise off for now, snare buzz. That's when the snare responds to like a kick drum resonating. It's trying to replicate that. It's a bit annoying now, but I think I'm gonna need it later. If you look at how this thing responds, it's pretty tricky. Like, if you would want to give it the same snappy shape as something like that, create that amplitude characteristic and have the noise of it be in a specific area at a specific time, it's really tricky to try to control that because as you can see, like it already has specific frequencies in very specific areas. And especially these resonant tones, you don't have a lot of control over that. So that's why I like using like a multiband transient shaper, so that it can just, yeah, try to create that feel overall, that it's a bit more under control. So I like using SD4B, which is made by LHI Audio. Shout out William. Absolute Batman. This is not out yet, but it will be out, so keep this on your radar. It's like the best multiband transient shaper I've seen so far. Sounds really good. And as you can see, you can much more tightly control things. Yeah, this resonance is a bit annoying, but my guess is that in context of the drum loop, it's not going to be that annoying. See? It hits the right frequencies much better when I turn it on. And yeah, so I'm just quickly gonna go through these and try to make sense out of this loop a little bit more. Yeah, this level is fine. Can make it a bit larger so that you guys can see better. Oh, I'm not using any toms, so that's not really interesting. Already sounds pretty alright, and just in mono, just by the dry microphones. And I use the rest of the microphones for a little bit of sauce, basically, just to make it sound better. But I usually don't like it when it's too roomy, because it already suggests a specific space, and sometimes that specific space kind of counteracts the space that you try to have all of the other sounds be in the track. So if you just start with something dry, you can always move out of that, but starting with something dry is usually easier. So let's say I also use a transient shaper on this one, on this overhead. I don't like over-exaggerating transients in the overhead. I just want to take down the sustain. And yeah, I have no clue why I do it before this fruity balance or after. It's just it doesn't really matter. Yeah, sometimes taking out too many highs or lows can just totally mess up your miking. So I try to watch out with that it's not too unnatural. Like, you're obviously gonna try to need to do that to make space for other sounds, but sometimes it can make the drum loop sound very unnatural by itself. So yeah, and then yeah, this sounds very unnatural. So what I'm gonna try to do is I'm gonna try to only high pass the sides. Like, usually what I think about the room microphone is like that vibe. It's gonna need that vibe, because otherwise, like, the drums won't have any splash, right? They won't have any to them, like some air. So if you take out too much of that, it's usually a bit, you know, it sounds a bit boring. I was working with a friend of mine who is a professional drummer, and I basically was mixing metal drums just like how I would mix drum and bass drums, and I focused a lot on the transients. And then I played back the video where you saw him drumming alongside the stems, and the drums just didn't sound big because they were focused on the click and on the punch, but it didn't have any room sound behind it. And if you don't have that splash to it, then it will never sound, you'll never make that psychoacoustic connection with it that it sounds big. And I think that's what's going wrong with like a lot of drum and bass being released nowadays. It's like, yeah, of course you need tight drums because, if you play them out, the reverb of the room is already going to suggest that largeness. But if you listen to it back at home, it just sounds like clicky drums. It's just a little click. It's not a drum. So yeah, a little rant there. I hope it didn't offend anybody. But yeah, I think I like it much better than that, like that way, with a little bit of reverb, but just in the right place and a little control embedded into the sound that you think that the sound is big. So this is like a preset with which I can just high pass the sides, like it's a mid side splitter. So this is all the stereo signal. And watch what happens when I just pull this up. Like right now you can hear frequencies left and right, and it's like very chaotic. And right now it's not like that at all. It's just that it's happening is okay, but it's just happening in the sides right now. In the highs, I mean. Sides in the highs. This still has a surprising amount of transient. And then so yeah, we're starting to get there. This sounds fine. I mean, it's too bad that I don't really have a way to show to bypass all of these effects in one go, so that you can hear the difference between like the start and the end. That's kind of the downside of this patcher thing, because like, okay, I could try to do this, I guess, that I just listen to all of these mics individually before they even go to their effects. Okay, yeah, it sounds much more natural, but it doesn't really sound tight. And yeah, from there you can just make this patch, save this whole patch as one thing. If you're at one point if you're at a point where you like what you hear, you can just save it, and then every time you feel like, oh, I need some acoustic drums, you can just open this this preset that you made. You can just type in something else. You can just go for like dun, 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 dun. Do something like this, like sounds pretty okay, like oh, there we go, I've got a new drum break. And it sounds pretty alright. What I also like to do is like master this a little bit more, like with this, for instance. I like this M saturator because it focuses the drums a little bit more on the bottom end of it, which is where you're gonna really feel the hit of the drum rather than that you just hear a click. But you can also overdo that, of course. So this is a little bit more clear. Yeah, so I could go on and on and on, and try to learn you more tricks about what you can do. But basically, I hope the concept is clear, that you try to have the right amount of frequencies in the right amount of area. That's the whole reason why you would use transient shapers and equalizers, and I'll take a little bit energy out there, add a little bit more there, because you're just trying to fill an appropriate amount of space and take out everything else that you don't need, right? I think I've heard Steve Duda that say once, the creator of Serum and owner of Xfer, together with deadmau5. He said, like, usually if I mix, I usually try to take out first what I don't need. And that's exactly what we try to do here. We have these like diagnostic tools which you can take out things that you don't need. And the rest is just, performing well. And trying to make the thing that you need loud and apparent up until a degree. Because you can go overboard with trying to make, drums loud and make it the most important thing in the whole track, while, it doesn't really necessarily carry a musical message. Like, obviously, having a drum pattern like this is going to be like super characteristic if you hear that in a track, and especially if it's going to be like going for the whole track, or if you need a focal point at the end of the bar somewhere or something, I don't know. But if you have, a more basic drum pattern, like, let's say something like this, just standard. Okay, that sounds really bad with these kind of drums, but so like the most basic thing, right? Something like that, then you need to reconsider where you want your energy to be and how important the individual hits are going to be. And it's just a game of where is your attention as a listener going to go, and you can kind of control that by making your drums more important or less important. I kind of quickly wanted to go over these two main important things. So I hope you understand what you need. I hope that you understand now all that you need to go about making drums. I've basically talked all about just, kick drums and snare drums and hi-hats right now, and how they kind of combine to make this cohesive drum vibe. You can totally throw that by the wayside and experiment with, drums that don't make any sense at all. Like, they shouldn't be making sense. You can, for instance, listen to my track like Abrasion, where all of the drums are off-grid, or you can listen to All About This, where the drums are just synthesized in a very abnormal way, and they occupy like a very strange amount of space, but that kind of gives the vibe of the track. So, like, I'm all for breaking rules, but I kind of feel comfortable breaking rules because I think I understand what the rules are in the first place, like what it means to make something simple work consistently. So I hope that was useful. What's also kind of like a trendy thing to do right now in drum and bass, or like not just right now, like it has been for the longest time, is combining these two factors, right? That if for instance you can't get a specific sound out of a kick drum that you want, or you want it to be a little bit more punchy or whatever, you want to combine both the effectiveness of the synth drum and you want to grab the vibe of the acoustic drum. That's doable. You can do that. It's very easy to go overboard with that, but let me explain how I would try to go about that. I have to be honest, I'm not really doing this anymore because I feel really comfortable, working with drums that aren't, the loudest drums ever. And at the same time, I think I'm getting more interesting results from just using acoustic drums and then just, working with the tools that I have rather than trying to force something that, nature doesn't really want to exist. But regardless, I'm going to show you how we'll go about that. So if you want to do this kind of thing, it's going to be really important that you understand where, your sounds occupy space. If I'll play this simple drum loop, you can use a spectrum analyzer like this, especially because it reads out these frequencies and these note values. It reads out all that you need to know, so that if you would want to swap anything related to these drums, just like if you wouldn't want this body of this drum to be acoustic, but you would want it to be, much more tight, more snappy. Let's say that I, want to have a kick drum that is both acoustic and has the same character of a synthesized drum, then I think I'm just also going to do that with a patcher and just open up a new patch. And then I'm just going to open a single addictive drums thing. Yeah, honestly, also why I'm not really doing this anymore is just because it's really hard. It's just really troublesome. So let's say that this kick drum, has like an okay sounding top. I think it's the same one I just used. Let's use another one. The thing is oh yeah, what I like about this one is that the decay in the transient has some vibe to it that I like. Yeah, it's also not too clicky and not too ringy or whatever. It's a bit noisy. The bass tone is okay, so I usually wouldn't try to manufacture a new one, but let's say I wanted to. Yeah, so then I would try to only, seclude what I would need from this kick, which is like a surprisingly little amount. So yeah, you can already hear that is more than enough in just a direct microphone. So why go through the trouble of trying to mix, the overhead and the room microphone? Yeah, and by turning it up, the decay of it is quite nice, but I don't need this part. I only need that little transient part. Yeah, that's all I need. And then I can just, I guess, can't I just drag this one in? Or whatever, I'll just make a new one. So I'm gonna add this serum in the same patch. And therefore it's going to play this C bass frequency. Well, it's playing at like 53 hertz. I don't know what it is by heart. Look. It's like a G. Something along the G sharp. Let's say G sharp. Or like maybe let's pitch down this kick a little bit to make it a G. So then, I'm gonna use a little trick. So if I know that I'm hitting a C right now, I'm gonna need to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 semitones down, because that's a G. It's gonna go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think this is the right octave as well. So this is where, the body of the kick would be at. You don't necessarily have to follow this rule that you try to put it in this exact same space as what the original has. But let's say that's important. So I'm gonna act as if I'm gonna use this transient. I'm probably later on gonna fade this in a little bit to give the transient a bit of space. And I'm also gonna give this body a bit movement. Yeah, there we go. That sounds decent. Random phases off. Should probably turn alternative kick drums off there. And as you can see, they don't blend at all. But the more I try to blend this thing, the more I high pass this thing, the less important it becomes in relation to this kick. Which, that doesn't always sound good if you take out a complete acoustic layer. So like the more you can get them to work together a little bit more, the better it's going to sound usually. Yeah, I want to limit them together a little bit. I'm also looking at the oscilloscope to see, if the shape makes sense. So yeah, I mean, this already screams like that it's an acoustic drum, right? And now all I have to do is if I would be in the context of a track, I would have to think, how loud do I want this transient to be in relation to this body of the kick? Because that's basically what it comes down to. Like, you already have so much control just adjusting the level. Yeah, and the more of a focal point the kick is going to be in your track, the more important it's going to be that you absolutely nail this. That it sounds really natural together, which is kind of tricky because there's a pitch modulation in this body, and it's probably not going to be the same in the body of this acoustic drum. So you can try to, mess around with that a little bit. This sounds better. Yeah. And I can also make this layer just shorter so that it doesn't necessarily decay that much, or I can just take another sound from another microphone. Okay, yeah. There you go. That's the basic idea behind it. I mean, it's not really that much more complicated than this. And to be honest, I also don't really, I don't really enjoy this process of doing this. I just wanted to show you, just in case that it would be necessary in context to your situation, what you're working on right now. Because usually I would only really do this if I can't for the life of me manage to make an acoustic thing sound good already by itself, which is, usually that doesn't really happen. So like it's more like a very clinical tool to generate extra material underneath something that already exists. Because like usually the transient by itself already sounds good enough. You just need to have an appropriate amount of it in the right space, I guess. So yeah, that kind of concludes this this masterclass. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned a lot from how I think about drums. Okay, I know it's a really nerdy way, a really clinical way. It's like probably the polar opposite to how other drummers, like how actual drummers think about their drums. They are much more focused on rhythm and how drawing a good rhythm works, and playing a good rhythm works, and how you can get a specific tone out of your drums. And yeah, that's probably what we should be focusing on a little bit more as well. But that's probably not why you're here. You're probably here to see me do stuff like this. So yeah, just short recap. If you're working on drums and you don't think it sounds good, try to imagine where the energy is at what moment, and is it being over exaggerated in a specific area, or like why does drum X sound good and why doesn't mine? It's probably because your distribution of energy in time and frequency doesn't work. Like you just distributed it the wrong way. Like the body decays too long, the body is too loud and it goes too hard into the distortion compared to the tail. The tail is too long, like the transient isn't loud, like there is too many, the overhead is too loud, the room microphone is too loud, it's too stereo. Like just try it out in mono first. And then if you're skilled with that, mix in a little stereo or something. I don't know. I'm sure at this point you have enough information to try to figure it out yourself. And yeah, all of these tools are interchangeable, of course. Like you can generate a sine wave with literally any synth, I hope. And all I used was limiters and distortions and equalizers. And yeah, you can work with different drum samplers, or you can like commission a drummer. Like you find a drummer that that has a setup with microphones, or just go to the studio together and record some sick drums, and then you'll have something that is going to be yours forever, and which you'll be able to use forever, and you can mix it in new ways forever and ever. Yeah, with the digital capabilities of like repitching drums and doing all kinds of stuff like frequency shifting or convolution or you can do so many things. So you're never gonna have too little material, right? So doing something like that is gonna be worth it. But otherwise, a synth is like money well spent. And yeah, I hope that helped. I hope you like that. I went a little over time. I was supposed to, keep this from half an hour up until an hour, but I went a little over time. Oh, by the way, I'm also gonna, in this month's Patreon drop, I'm gonna include all of these tools. So all of these presets, I'm just gonna give them to you, and gonna try to export them separately for if you don't have FL Studio, so that you can, do these things, even though they shouldn't really be hard. This is probably not gonna make any sense because these wouldn't work. But yeah, cool. Everything that will make sense, I'm just gonna share with IMANU, and I'll be sure that he will include it together with this video when it drops this month on his Patreon. So thank you so much for listening. You are cool. And now I hope you're better at drums.